Radical forgiveness as taught by Jesus. The Amish response to tragedy. In October 2006, Charles Roberts stormed into an Amish schoolhouse in Nickel Mines, Pennsylvania, killing 5 Amish school children and injuring 5 others before taking his own life. He was distraught and angry with God because his infant daughter died. The Amish community's response stunned many. They forgave the shooter almost immediately. Not only that, but in the years since, the Amish formed a bond with Roberts' family, offering them compassion and support in the face of their shared tragedy. This act of forgiveness reflects the radical nonviolence at the heart of the Amish faith. Who really takes Jesus' teachings on nonviolence seriously? Groups like the Amish, Mennonites, and Quakers take Jesus' teachings literally. They reject all forms of violence, including war, self-defense, and even punitive justice. Their commitment to pacifism is a defining part of their faith, making them stand out in a world where most Christians have accepted some form of just war doctrine. These groups belong to historic peace churches that have consistently upheld nonviolence, even at great personal and communal cost. Their refusal to serve in the military and their work in peace-building efforts show their deep dedication to these principles, a consistency and sacrifice rarely seen in mainstream Christianity today. Mainstream Christianity and the just war doctrine. Most Christians today, including Catholics, Protestants, and evangelicals, accept that violence can sometimes be necessary, especially to protect the innocent or uphold justice. This belief is rooted in the just war tradition, which was introduced centuries after Jesus, largely shaped by influential thinkers like St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas. A less well-known but interesting case is that of the Seventh-day Adventists. Many Adventists have historically served as conscientious objectors, refusing to bear arms while still offering non-combatant service, such as working as medics. However, this is not a strict doctrine, and individual members are free to follow their conscience in wartime. The most famous example is Desmond Doss, an Adventist medic who served during World War II. Doss refused to carry a weapon, yet saved around 75 soldiers at the Battle of Okinawa, earning the Medal of Honor. His story was immortalized in the 2016 film Hacksaw Ridge. What did Jesus actually teach about violence? This leads to an important question. Who really follows Jesus' teachings on peace and nonviolence? Is it mainstream Christianity, or these smaller groups like the Amish, Mennonites, Quakers, and Adventists? There's no evidence that Jesus ever advocated for just war. His teachings in the Sermon on the Mount consistently emphasized nonviolence, love for enemies, and radical forgiveness. The just war concept arose much later, as theologians like St. Augustine in the 4th century and St. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century tried to reconcile Jesus' message with the realities of governing a society. Augustine argued that violence might be justified to preserve order and protect the innocent, but this was a pragmatic compromise, not a reflection of Jesus' actual teachings. But what about by a sword? Of course, Jesus' teachings on nonviolence do contain some apparent contradictions, like when he said in Luke 22:36,
"If you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one."
or in Matthew 10:34,
"I did not come to bring peace, but a sword."
However, most scholars interpret these passages as metaphor or hyperbole, not literal calls to violence. In the bigger picture, Jesus consistently rejected violence even in self-defense, teaching his followers to turn the other cheek and love their enemies. His arrest in Gethsemane is perhaps the clearest example, when Jesus rebuked Peter for drawing his sword. Early Christians versus post-Constantine Christianity. In the early centuries, Christians had little choice but to embrace nonviolence. They were powerless minorities, persecuted by the Roman Empire. It was easier to follow pure pacifism when they had no armies, no political power, and no weapons. That all changed when Constantine embraced Christianity, making it the empire's favored religion. Suddenly, Christians became the persecutors, wielding state power. They began suppressing heretics, shutting down pagan temples, and even persecuting Jews. Prominent victims of this shift included the Arians, declared heretics after the Council of Nicaea, the Donatists, and even the pagan philosopher Hypatia, who was murdered by a Christian mob in Alexandria. Augustine and the justification of coercion. This is the world Augustine inherited, a world where Christians held power. Augustine did not directly call for executions, but his writings inspired future persecution of heretics. He argued that coercion could be an act of love meant to bring wayward souls back to the truth. Dangerous line of thinking that gave theological cover for violence in the name of faith. To his credit, Augustine explicitly opposed the death penalty for heretics in his letter 93, urging that they be disciplined, not executed. Still, his broader framework laid the groundwork for centuries of religious violence. The hard truth is that following Jesus' teachings on nonviolence is extraordinarily difficult. Imagine, no hatred, no violence, only love, compassion, and forgiveness at all times. That's why Jesus warned,
The path to life is narrow.
Unfortunately, much of Christianity abandoned this narrow path after gaining power. Augustine's just war theory is just one example of how compromise crept in, softening Jesus' radical message. Tolstoy's reminder and the example of pacifists. This is the very lesson that Leo Tolstoy re-emphasized in his powerful work, The Kingdom of God is Within You. Tolstoy pointed to Jesus' words,
Do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also.
This is not passivity, it's moral courage, a refusal to repay violence with violence, trusting in God's ultimate justice. It's the same principle that inspired Gandhi, who was not even a Christian, to develop nonviolent resistance in India. Later, Martin Luther King Jr. and Nelson Mandela would draw from the same well during the civil rights movement and anti-apartheid struggle. What does it mean for us today? If we truly want to follow Jesus, then we should oppose the death penalty, advocate for due process, and reject extrajudicial killings, even for the bad guys. Justice matters, but killing should not be the answer. Life imprisonment or reclusion perpetua should suffice to protect society while leaving room for redemption. Following Jesus is hard, especially when it comes to loving our enemies and rejecting violence. That's why the path is narrow. But the reward isn't just heaven, it's becoming a person of love, compassion, and integrity, right here, right now. In the end, the morality of our actions is the reward itself, because we love God and our neighbors, not to earn heaven, but because it's the right thing to do. This is the heart of Jesus' message, one that history often corrupted, but which remains as radical and challenging today as it was 2,000 years ago.